the host of the Jordan Harbinger Show. Welcome to the event, Mr. Jordan Harbinger. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. Oh, it's exciting. Look at this very fancy setup you've got here. I feel like I'm on CNN.
That's what you get with Amazon Prime 52 blue torches.
Is that really? You have like blue lights all over the place?
You just line them up. I kept ordering the red lights and I got a call. What you're getting the red lights for? Is this a COVID diversification? So I had to change that scenario. So we ended up with the blue ones. What you can't see behind this dude is that the studio has like been overhauled. So it's a real mess behind the camera. Mm-hmm. So it's not as fancy as it looks, but you can't talk. You've got a nice background there.
Yeah, this is a purple sheet of paper.
Is that the same one that is on your, is it the same one that's on your podcast cover as well, which looks awesome? Is that how it was done?
Yeah. So I don't know how they did that, but they just took the sample of the paper and then they were like, oh, we're just going to do this. I'm not even sure how the artist did that. I loved it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to use that as my actual background all the time. And then I got one of those cool lenses that does, is it bokeh, where it's like blurred on the outside and then focus is in the middle. So I figured like that, you know, when you watch a YouTube video and you see like an 18-year-old talking about something, but he's more credible because his video is really sharp and the lighting's right. I was like, I want that effect. You know, I want to look like more credible than I probably am because I have proper lighting. I need all the help I can get, you know, like lighting and this blurry bokeh, whatever it's called, effect. I want that, you know, I want that effect. And it looks good because then you can have a mess behind you like you do right now. And it's like, oh, he's got things back there that are meaningful, not like a pile of old microphones and audio interfaces that have, you know, haven't made it to the garage yet.
That is exactly it. That is quite literally it. Like I've rotated this round so much to make it look like I also know about podcasting. So earlier today, it was like a book on like design or something. I was like, I need to swap that for other stuff that proves I do podcasting. So I get that, mate. I get that. Well, listen, welcome, man. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure, dude. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, I mean, I'm sort of. This is going to sound really weird, but I'm not a podcast listener that much anymore. It's sort of like, you know, when you work in the chocolate factory and you get all the chocolate and now you don't want chocolate anymore. I'm that guy. So I only listen to 3 or 4 podcasts, but yours is one of them. And I find that I'm constantly digging into the back catalogue, like I told you on Slack. And it's fascinating to me because there are so many interview shows out there now. Like it's such a prominent thing. And what I really want to help podcasters today with is like, how do we avoid being one of those other podcasts that just do interviews? And to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit.
Screw those interview podcasts. Am I right?
Yeah,
am I right?
Do you want to get rid of all of the other ones and
all
just
of them.
funnel them to the Jordan Show?
Get rid of all of them.
Like, why do you think it's the default idea? Like, why is it the default podcast is to do an interview show?
I'll tell you why I started, and I have a feeling this is why, well, not why I started, but I'll tell you why I started doing interviews and stuck with it. So originally, when I first started doing my show, I was outlining all the content, creating a bunch of ideas that I was going to teach. And then I was like, oh, okay, you know, I'm running out of time and I have an episode due this week. Why don't I interview this interesting person that I found? That's a good idea. And I did that. And I was like, oh, that was really fun. And then the next week I was like, oh, I've got another really fascinating friend I want to have on the show. So I had that person on the show. And then the third week came around and I outlined all my content again. And I was like, man, this is a lot of work. This is a hell of a lot of work. I'm outlining, I'm creating outline. I didn't want to reuse that word, but I came up short. And there's just a ton of content here. And I've got to think of original thoughts and ideas. And then I went, oh man, you know what's easier? Just doing interviews. And friends of mine were like, you got to be careful because if you do interviews, you're going to just end up with an interview podcast. And like, nobody wants one of those. And I thought, yeah, nobody wants one of those. So I kept doing the outlines and the outlines and the outlines, but I was taking the bar exam to become a lawyer. So it was like the certification exam for becoming an attorney. This is like 15 years ago now. And I take the exam and I get through it, but I keep releasing my podcast. But they're all interviews because that's what I had time for. And I was like, oh, I really like this. I enjoy this. And I think there's a lot of people that enjoy conversations. There's a lot of people that enjoy interviews. But there's an equal or greater number of people that just don't have anything else to say, but they want a podcast because they read somewhere that you can get rich podcasting or die trying. And they decided they were going to do an interview podcast, and there's like this whole sort of network of people that all they do is interview each other. So it's like the Jordan Harbinger show with Mark Asquith, the Mark Asquith show with Jordan Harbinger. And it's just over and over and over. And it's like this bubble of, I don't know, 200 or 300 people. And they kind of exist in the Facebook groups of like a lot of these products where people teach podcasting. And there's nothing wrong with starting off that way. You got to get your teeth cut somewhere. But I think that's why a lot of people start interview podcasts, because they either run out of stuff to say, they never had anything to say in the first place, or they're just like, look, man, I got a full-time job. This is a side hustle. I'm just dipping my toes in the water. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. And I'm not judging anybody for that. I get it. Like I said, I started that way myself. I just happened to later on be like, wow, I really love talking with people. This is my strong suit. This is where I shine. But I will tell you, it's more now. My interview prep is much more work than my solo teach something yourself prep. I mean, now it's 10 times longer.
Well, that's actually something that I wanted to talk about, because I mean, you've got some accolades, man. You know, you go to your website, which is one of the best designed websites I've seen for a long time, by the way. It's brilliant. You've got a lot of accolades on there. You know, you got people like Malcolm Gladwell saying that the interview that you did with him was up there with Conan and Kimmel. Like that is high praise, man.
Yeah, it's cool.
It really is cool. And I mean, it's crazy, you know, to kind of align what you've just said with, I started this because it's what I had time for. I was running the bar, and then suddenly, oh my, that's a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that a lot of people come into this thinking what you've just said, like, okay, this is easier and it's quicker, and I get all the benefits of being a podcaster, all that create, grow, monetize stuff that I hear about without really having to do the work.
Right.
But when you interview Malcolm Gladwell to such a level that he says, this is as good as Kimmel and Conan, it can't be that easy. So take us a little bit more behind the scenes of that process. Let's dispel that a little bit. Like, how much work do you put into? What's the typical flow?
Yeah, I definitely spend somewhere between 8 and 10 hours for each guest doing prep. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. It sort of depends on the guest, but I used to do the same thing as a lot of other podcasters do now, and this is like 10 years ago, just to caveat this, but I used to go into the interview going, all right, this person is like a language they teach foreign languages. Cool. They have an ebook. I'm not going to read that. All right, I'm going to read the front page of their website. I kind of get what they're doing. Okay, cool. I'm just going to like coast through this interview and be like, tell us 3 things that people need to know about learning foreign languages or something, whatever it was, just lazy mailing it in stuff. And it kind of worked. I got a popular show as a result of that. But that, again, was like 10, 11, 12, whatever years ago. The reason that worked then was there were like 1,000 or 2,000 podcasts. Most of them were about tech. I already had a built-in audience from what I was doing before, which was like dating, relationships, networking, whatever the topics I normally focused on were. So I had a built-in level of expertise that I was bringing, maybe not to a foreign language learning podcast, but to something that was like body language or whatever. And I could bring in my built-in expertise, and I could sort of like wing it, and it was okay. But by today's standards, those podcasts are garbage. And I'm not just saying that because we all look at our old work and go like, ooh, cringe. I look at it because I'm like, all right, I'm talking into like a MacBook keyboard, no USB mic, typing emails at the same time because I'm multitasking. Of course, the keys are getting clickety-clack, into the recording. And I was just mailing it in, like I was phoning it in. And then around my 7-year anniversary of podcasting, I remember this because I had Robert Greene was the guest. He's a well-known author, had Robert Greene. And I interviewed him, and I didn't want to screw this up. So beforehand, that week, I like cleared my schedule and read his book, which is like 800 pages. I think it was The 48 Laws of Power, something like that, one of those books. And after the interview, he's like, why did this take so long? We've known each other for a long time. And I go, well, I really didn't want to mess this up. I wanted to do a good job, and I needed to like work on my interview skills, and I wanted to read your book and really understand it. And he goes, mess this up, man. This is one of the best interviews that I've had, and I've done a lot of media. And that was 7 years in. So I was like, wow, that's such high praise. I'm going to go get all new equipment and like really work on my podcast and like really take it seriously, because if I'm good, according to Robert Greene, then maybe I really have some chops for this. This is, again, like it's probably 8-9 years ago now, something like that. And that just sort of changed the way that I look at things. And I remember talking to my wife at the time. She was my girlfriend. So I guess she's my ex-girlfriend now. And I was talking to my wife, and I go, hey, Robert Greene said this. She's like, I heard, because she was listening on other headphones. And she goes, so are you going to read the book for all your guests now and do the same amount of prep? And I was like, hell no, I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous. And then she goes, oh, okay, well, you might not have like as good of a conversation. And I remember just going, all right, I've got to sort of digest come to terms with the fact that either I can put the work in and do the prep and get it done and do good interviews, or I can continue to lie to myself and go, well, I'm kind of getting away with the winging it thing. And like, I'm caught up on, I mean, we didn't have Netflix back then really, but I'm caught up on, I don't know, video games. I don't even know what I was doing with my time, but screwing around on Facebook and social media. So I was like, if I'm going to be really good at this, like if I'm going to take Robert Greene's advice and like focus on this and really put my talents to work, am I going to do the work, or am I going to keep lying to myself about it and then come to the same realization in 5 years that I actually do have to like do this amount of work to get good at it? So I just sort of went, this is the moment. This is the come to Jesus moment, or whatever you want to call it, where like you realize that if you're a bodybuilder, you can't eat at McDonald's every day. Or if you realize that if you're going to be an attorney, you have to study. You can't just like go to class or show up whenever you want. And if you're going to be a runner, you actually have to go out and run, even when it's snowing outside, like that kind of stuff. That was my moment where I was like, okay, if I'm going to be an interviewer, I have to read the book. I have to read the books, the other books. I have to listen to other interviews that they've done. I can't just go into it cold and be like, my personality is so great. I've seen some podcasters do this, but unless they're comedians with professional experience and their show is primarily them being surprised by things and being funny, they can't do it. And there's a reason that a lot of people who are well known will come on my show and then go on another show that's run by like a celebrity interviewer, and they'll tell me, because I asked, because I'm self-serving and arrogant. But no, they'll tell me like, hey, this was a more complete interview that you did. And I'm like, good, and they'll go, oh, well, Conan was funny. He's Conan. But my interview with you is where I really got out all the stuff I really wanted to get across when I was writing this book. And I'm like, that's what I'm looking for. Because I'm not saying that I'm better than Conan O'Brien. Conan is funnier than me. He thinks quick on his feet. He does a good show. He's a naturally funny person who's spent years and years and years honing his sense of humor. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to be the best interviewer around. So if I'm doing that, then my job is different. And Conan is doing an equal or greater amount of work doing other things, I'm sure, like writing jokes, looking at whatever they've done, looking at their work. Also, he was a writer on The Simpsons for like 10 years and did all these other things. So like he put in a greater amount of work than I have. And I have no doubt that comedians who do comedy podcasts put in a ton of work. They're just writing jokes and writing content, whereas I'm reading the books and going through and generating questions. So it's a different amount of work. And I think the difference is that, or the commonality rather, is that when I'm doing an interview and when Theo Vaughn or Conan O'Brien or whoever is doing an interview, we're both doing a lot of work. It may show more when I do the interview because it's like, wow, he read the book and he knew this other thing, and the other person, the guest, was surprised that he knew that. But I'm not doing more work than those guys are doing. Those guys are doing work that's invisible. And that's, I think, the danger that a lot of people run into is they don't realize that a lot of work people do is invisible. They look at somebody like Joe Rogan and they go, oh, well, he doesn't prepare because he likes to be surprised. It's like, yeah, but he spent years doing MMA announcing. He spent years doing reality TV shows. Spent years doing podcast conversation. So he's a professional humorist, professional conversationalist, professional broadcaster, professional ring announcer. He's not coming in like, gee, what's this whole podcasting thing about? He's coming in with like years and years and years of experience. And even then, I think if he wanted to do a more complete interview, which is not his goal, to be fair, he would be well served to read the book. Like, you can tell he doesn't really know what's going on with a lot of the guests. That's kind of by design. So it's tempting for people to come in and go, well, Joe Rogan, he doesn't really do any prep. And, these other guys, they're just joking around. That's what it looks like because they've done so much work. Like, for me, nobody will go, oh, that Jordan guy just came in and winged it. It's really obvious I've read the book. But if my job wasn't to be as complete and it was to be funny, and you would just think I was naturally really funny. You wouldn't think, oh, he sat around for 8 hours writing jokes. I'm lucky I'm not that funny, so I don't have to deal with that. But I guarantee you that Conan O'Brien, when he does a Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend episode, he's got his writer's room, him, his assistant, whatever. They're all going through every bit of work the person's done. He knows these people a lot of the time. And then they're writing jokes and content based on that. This is not him just going like, who do we have today? Jimmy Kimmel? All right, put him on. That's not how these shows are done. They look that way because of the background work that goes into it. It's like the house isn't standing just because they built a nice frame. It's standing on a solid foundation. You just can't see it because it's underground. I mean, that's the sort of pedantic analogy that I have. Metaphor.
It kind of speaks to the idea of why generalists, not necessarily just generalists, but if you think about, if we look at like startup world, a lot of the founders that do really well, they start their business that they become known for at 42, 43, 44, 45. Yeah. Like it becomes crazy when you actually start to look at it, because we map the whole, it's a startup, this guy must be 21. Mm-hmm. And it's very often that's not the case, because you're absolutely right, is that they worked at a pizza shop, so they know how to deal with people getting a little leery. They did a driving job for such a long time, and that they know what monotony feels like and how to handle it, so that when they have to do something that's hard, they know how to handle it. So they've developed, 3 or 4 different types of mindset based on doing other things that seem to be a little bit unrelated, but that actually, when you pull them together, it's like, well, of course, if you were to list these things, of course, this person can do this business because they've done all that stuff. And it reminds me of, I think was it someone like Michael Phelps, who said that when he was training as a kid, he'd put in the extra Saturday or Sunday morning shift to do his training. And his logic was that I didn't have to do that, but if I do that once a week, it's only a couple of hours, and that gives me 52 extra training sessions per year. So I'll be that far ahead, but no one sees that stuff. And that's the thing that I want to get into with that, is that it's like the extra 10%. It's that, what is the detail bit that we need to focus on? What is that one piece of the puzzle? You realized it seemingly when you read the book, and you were told, oh my word, this was such an easy interview and it's actually fantastic content. If you look at a lot of interviewers now, so if you see people that are doing all these podcast interviews, and they're trying to, let's be honest, a lot of people are trying to be you, a lot of people are trying to be Ferris, they're trying to be Rogan, and they don't see everything that you've just talked about. What's the 10% that they could do better with? Is it the research? Is it something else? Or is it about deciding what type of interviewer you want to be and then picking the 10% that hits that mark? Like how would you actually decide what to make better?
Yeah, I would say that you have to experiment. No surprise there. I mean, a lot of people are not really doing that. They're just following the playbook from the course that they bought on podcasting, or like the idea that they got from watching their favorite podcasters. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to be really clear. Like, you're supposed to follow the playbook. The whole point is you follow the playbook and follow the rules until you go, I don't like this rule, and I think I'm going to break it and see what happens. And then you break it and you go, oh, that worked out for me. Because like right now, I could to give you an example of this rule breaking, I guarantee you that I could do an interview with no prep and it would be okay. Depending on the guest, it would be fine. I would just sort of skate by on like being quick on my feet and asking inherently good questions because I'm listening, which is where the good questions come from anyways. And I'd probably do okay, but do I want to deliver an okay product to my audience, or do I want to deliver like a really good product? And also you have to think about what is your competitive advantage? If you're like a really good looking, fit dude, you should probably do like a YouTube based show so that you've got that like appeal going for you. Right. And the same, that's an easy example, but the same thing goes for interviewing. If I'm a science nerd, I should probably start there because I have background knowledge on this. It's going to be interesting for me personally. You can't really fake being interested in a topic. It's really hard to do. I mean, look at me right now. This is like painfully hard to do. You have to really be interested in reading the books and going through the content to be able to develop like an expertise, if I can sort of use that word loosely. And I think for a lot of folks, they're like, oh, where do I start? What's profitable? That's good if you're thinking about like what kind of goods do I want to sell on Amazon? What has good margins? What kind of food do I want to cook at a restaurant? Cool. Here's a type of food that you can whip together that doesn't have expensive ingredients and has high margins. I don't know. I don't know anything about food, but like, let's say that you're cooking Indian food, but you're some Irish guy that's never cooked Indian food, but you looked and the margins are really good because you can throw it together a lot of stuff and then mark it up. You're probably not going to make really great Indian food if you're just doing it because the margins are good. You're going to make really great Indian food because you're an Irish guy that lived in India for 5 years, studied under a chef. You had a passion for Indian food. You married an Indian woman who had brought all these great recipes from her grandma, and now you cook together in the restaurant. It's just so unique and so interesting. You have to leverage that. And I don't think it's any secret that people should leverage their strengths and leverage their talents. I think it's really obvious that people should do that. But we get caught up in like, oh, well, I need to do something that's profitable. And I get the need for that, by the way. Having a kid who's one, I get the need to make sure the check's clear. But you have to be pretty careful. You have to balance this because there's a whole lot of people that will say, what I need to do is make some money. Thus, I want to do a podcast that is about coaching because then I can hire myself out or get hired out for consulting. And that can be like $200, $300 an hour. And if you're not really interested in it, not only are you going to obviously burn out, not only are you obviously never going to get into the top 10 percentile of whatever that is, you're never going to really want to do it. And that's a huge problem. Like you're not going to want to do the work that it takes to get to the top. So, and that's how I knew that being a lawyer wasn't for me because I'd go to these, they're called continuing legal education training sessions that you have to do every year. And there'd be lawyers that are like, and then get this, we took the subprime mortgages and we decided to bundle them in securities that we could then list on NASDAQ and other stock exchanges. People could buy shares of these mortgage pools. And I was just like, where's the nearest sharp object that I can like jam into my eyeball and get out of this meeting? And that's how I knew it wasn't for me because I would look around and other lawyers would be like, whatever. And then there'd be some people that are like, well, that's a, look at that guy. That guy's smart. And I'm just like, kill me now. So I knew that this wasn't for me. So with interviewing and with getting great personalities on the show, I was like, oh, I'm really interested in their stories. I'm really interested in like firing back, challenging them, reading their book, finding things that don't make sense to me, asking questions. Like that's where I'm really, really keen because it's, like, I don't like arguing per se, but I liked that part of being an attorney, like questioning people and getting to the root of it or like trying to see if I can understand their arguments, find holes. That's what interviewing kind of became for me. And a lot of people, they don't really look at what they want to do and they don't look at their strengths and put those things together. They look at like what's going to be profitable. And there's a place for that, but I think you should figure out what it is you can stand to do for a long time and what you're good at and what might actually make some money. I'm not a follow your passion guy at all, but I am a sort of like, make sure that you have some passion that you can bring with you into your business endeavor. Because I know a lot of miserable people that are like, I hate every minute of this, but I make $145,000 a year. So that's what's up because I got 2 kids. Don't ask me anymore. You know, there's a lot, Wall Street's littered with the bodies of people that like the most exciting thing in their life is they're going to buy another boat because their life sucks and they're like an investment banker that hates every minute of working in the office, you know?
Yeah, you build yourself a prison if you hate it. And I mean, I think so many people do that generally. I think a lot of podcasters do that. They start on the path of a podcast about X or Y and then end up thinking, why the hell did I start this? I've done 50 episodes. I want to quit it. And you can tell because the content degrades. Speaking about keeping content fresh, what impresses me about what you do is that you go, because you are able to get in front of these people and you've now developed that mindset of saying, do you know what? I am going to go that deep with each one of these things. You end up not just having a breadth of knowledge, but your depth of knowledge in each one of these things is probably a little greater than the layman in any one of them. You know, you have a little more expertise in any one of the things that you've spoken to a guest about by virtue of your research process. Do you think, because I would imagine that someone that's doing a high quality interview show would be worried about diminishing returns. You know, I have to put more time into this to become better and better and better. Otherwise, my content will start to degrade. Do you think that your show and your interviews become better quality continually? They compound up because you become more inquisitive because of your breadth of knowledge. You know, you can you can start to make metaphors and analogies about something in science with the Wall Street guy because you've acquired all of this other knowledge. You can sort of connect a lot of this up. Is that a factor in how you continue to be so high quality?
Yeah, there's some of that. And I don't know the answer to all of this, right? Like, I don't know if that's the only reason. I was always pretty quick on my feet with like, when people used to make fun of your friends and stuff in elementary school, middle school, high school / now, I was always the one that could think so much faster than everybody else. And my wife always says like, oh, you're the one that's good with words. You write this email or you talk to him about this, and I get that a lot. That said, the other thing that honed this was doing live radio for 3.5, how long years. Cause you get callers that would be like, Jordan, I love your show, but I think you're a blee, 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 blee. And then I have to like do something about that. And then they're like, oh, what do you have to say about this? And I have exactly 5 seconds, not even, to like come up with something that sounds good and doesn't embarrass everyone and isn't totally false. So I train myself in that way. But yeah, to your question, I think there's a lot of times where somebody will say, well, this, and this. And I'm like, I'm 99% sure that I read in this other book by this other expert about this. And I remember asking like Dr. Anders Ericsson, who was on my show recently, I said, what about this 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell talks about? Because Dr. Anders Ericsson talked, he just passed away recently. He talked about deliberate practice, which is like, if you're learning guitar, you can this is actually a perfect answer to your question, I think. If you're going to learn to play guitar, you can just play guitar. Right? You can play a ton of guitar. You can play a ton of songs you like. You can try and play songs that you hear. But great guitar players, they pick up a guitar and they're like, oh, I can't really do this. I don't play guitar. You're about to find out that. You're about to find that out. I can't do this thing where I have to move my fingers really fast along the fret from one fret to another or whatever they're called, right? Like I can't get there quick enough to do this particular technique or this particular sound on the guitar. And so this country singer, and I forget his name now, what all he did during this interview or pre-interview was he was just messing around with his guitar, and he was like going like right over and over and over, and it was like, what is this guy doing? He was just practicing this really, really hard thing. He wasn't playing Sweet Home Alabama. He wasn't coming up with new songs. He wasn't jamming out. He just spent weeks just doing that. I mean, he probably did other things as well, but he just really leaned into that. And then when he had to do it during a song, he was like, oh, I've done literally 1,000 or more reps of this particular thing. And then he'll move on to something else. So for me, doing live radio, reading the books, looking at really complicated topics, talking to really bright experts that are much smarter than me and much more educated than me on their topics, I won't say sparring, but doing interviews with those people has taught me that if someone comes on and goes, oh, well, this and that and the other thing, I can be like, whoa, wait. I've talked with a lot of people that said this, and this. And here's an analogy and a metaphor that, you'll understand because I used the same one during that show, or they used it with me when they were trying to teach me this topic. So I can take all that stuff and cycle it. You don't just get it from conversations, though. You get it from the books. You get it from the books that you read. You get it from their talks that these people give that are like an hour long. So you really do have to like stack these things together if you're going to be good at this. You can't just, even if you're great at winging it, you can't just wing it and then expect it to work. You really have to learn these subjects as good as, well, you're never going to be that good, but as good as you can, but almost as good as the person who's presenting it. The advantage you have when you're reading a book, for example, is I'm reading your book. I read it Monday. It's Thursday. We're doing the interview. You wrote that book last year. You've talked about it a lot. It's a book you wrote. You know everything about it. But I have an advantage in that it's recent and fresh for me, and you have an advantage in that you're an expert in that field and you wrote the book. So we're on not equal footing, but I'm approaching it, right? If I'm trying to wing it, you're just teaching me something. It's a less interesting conversation because you spend an hour going through basics. You never get to the good stuff because I don't know where the good stuff is. I didn't read the book. I have no idea if there is any good stuff. I don't want that to happen during my conversations. I want to know where I'm going.
Actually, that brings up a really good point. So there were kind of two connecting threads that are running through my head now. I've been scribbling a pile of notes because You mentioned a phrase there, so getting the reps in. If you like, I hear this so much from the people that I see as having been successful over the last 30, 40, 50 years. So people like Schwarzenegger, people like Tiger Woods, they constantly talk about reps. Everything's a rep, and you've got to get good at it. And I totally get that, and I understand it completely. However, I reckon people often mistake that for not being repetitive in a deliberate manner, like you stated, but just repeating and kind of sitting back on that repetition. But then what you said, the connecting thread there was that you said, I don't want my content to get like that. I don't want to go down there where I become repetitive. And I'm an interview in format only. I'm not an interview in entertainment purposes or from an educational perspective, format only, just to churn it out, and the quality just descends and descends. And I think one of the things that you and I have spoken about this in the past, and it always fascinated me, is that when we talked about how much prep you do, there was always a very different answer to not the amount of prep, but the type of prep. And we talked about this before, where you don't always want to go to the obvious places. I think we talked about this when we were having sushi, those rolls in LA.
Yeah, I had like 13 hand rolls, I remember.
You really did have a wild amount of those rolls.
I didn't get this dad bod without doing my own work on it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
why do you think I've got a head-only camera? This is it. We're all dad bod, dude. Welcome to lockdown. And we talked about the fact that you don't want to be obvious. You don't want to go to the places. Yes, you'll read the book, but the book is really so that you have a starting point and that you have a level of knowledge that you can kind of back and forth a little bit.
Yeah.
But how do you stop an interview going to the places that interviewee has gone before 1,000 times? Because that's the thing that makes your interview stand out. How the heck do you do that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways of getting rid of, they're called sound bites, or I call them sound bites, like where somebody who's media trained will have these, where they're like, yeah, my talking points are, I want to talk about this and this and this, and then plug my book in each one. And I will often steer away from those because I've heard them talk about those in 2 or 3 other interviews. So I'm like, oh, these are their talking points. They talk about climate change and alternative fossil fuels or whatever the hell it is. And I'm like, I want to get away from that. Let's talk about these other things. I'll tell them in the beginning, I'll say, hey, I listened to a bunch of your interviews. I know you've talked to death about fossil fuels and climate change. Let's talk about nuclear energy instead. And they'll go, oh, okay. And you kind of give them a little bit of warning, but habits are habits. So they'll fall back into those talking points. Then what I will do if I see that coming, there's a couple things I can do. I can either sort of change the subject, right? I can go, well, I know you're getting into the fossil fuel thing here, and we can later on, if we have time for that, we can get into that. But I've heard that in other places. People can listen to your other interviews for that. I'd love to focus on the nuclear energy element, and people will kind of go like, oh yeah, right. You wanted to get into that. The other option that you can do, aside from steering the conversation away politely, is, and some people are not good at being interviewed, but they get media training, and that's kind of the worst combination, unfortunately, because you end up with somebody who can't talk about things that they're not actually trained to discuss. And celebrities get this, depending on the type of celebrity. There's a lot of like I don't want to use the word amateur to denigrate anyone, but there's like amateur people who are not used to being on mic or on camera. And those people they'll hire a media trainer for their book tour or something. And I'll say, this person just cannot get away from their sound bites. So that the second option, the nuclear option, as it were, is I record for an hour and a half or an hour. Typically I want an hour and a half. I want to release a hour-long-ish show. If they're really stuck on their talking points, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, there's so much here. Do you have any extra time? Usually they'll be like, sure. How much extra time do you want? Oh, just an extra 20 minutes. I know that's really long because we're already at, we're going to be at 90, but if you can go a little longer, it'll make for a better show. And often they're like, yeah, great. So I'll get that whole thing recorded, and then I'll just tell my editor, okay, first 45 minutes are just her sound bites. You can't seem to shake it. So just cut that crap out. Keep the intro, keep the first 5 minutes, whatever it is, find a natural segue point, and then I'll, record a pickup that's like, you've talked about this and this and this. I want to skip over that for now. Let's go directly to the nuclear energy thing, and then we'll just cut out all the stuff. Because people who are media trained, they often will stick to their sound bites until they get tired and they run out of stuff. And I can outrun you. I can record for 6 hours. You can't. I don't care if you're a book author that's been on tour for 8 months. You can't talk for as long as me. You can't be interviewed for as long as me. If you're on my show, I'm relaxed. You're probably less relaxed. You know, if I'm working from home like I am right now, you know, I've got a fridge full of drinks behind me. I can take a bathroom break and you wouldn't even know it. I'll leave that one to your imagination. And like, you know, I can outlast you. My voice is going to last longer. So I will just run you until you're tired, like a dog, and then or like a horse maybe, and then I will take the parts that I want and turn that into a show. And I'm not trying to like be tricky, but if you can't get out of your pattern because your habits are there, your training is there, I'm just gonna run circles around you until you are exhausted, or make you run circles around me until you're exhausted, and then we'll have a real conversation, and then I'll just cut it together. You know, I'll just cut the crap that I don't want. And it's rare that I do that, but it is useful because you end up with people that think like, wow, this is like the best interview I ever did. And the reason is because they finally had to get kind of authentic and we're comfortable with each other because we've been talking for 2 hours. So you really, really get a good feel for that conversation and that guest. And then you just cut out the stuff that's all awkward, stilted, and scripted.
So that's an interesting point as well. So I know you are very close with the production team. So even when you do your ad spots, you know, they are not just, hey, this is Jordan, go buy stamps from stamps.com. Like that's not your shtick. That's not what you do. It's very much, hey, tell us about this. And you spend a lot of time seemingly crafting, not only obviously the ad spots, and they don't necessarily feel addy because you say, here's the ad spot, but it's not like you're going, there's this ad spot. Like, how important is the overall experience with your production team? And in particular, did you always have that team? Did you start doing that yourself? Like, how did you, I suppose I'm asking a few questions here. Did you always start with that team? And how the heck did you let go in order to let someone else help you with that? And then to back that up, how did they become so ingrained in what you do? Because what you just said was very heavily reliant on that team.
Yeah, that's true. So I edited my own show for years, probably at least 4, possibly 5 years. And then a guy from your school, from your hometown, emailed me out of the blue and was like, I love your podcast. Can I edit it for you? And I was like, no, I edit my own show. And he was like, and he's very like British. So he was like, okay, just in case you need any help, I'm a professional audio engineer. Now, 2020 hindsight, I'm like, he was trying to tell me like, dude, you are terrible at editing. You don't know what you're doing. Let me do it for you. So when I got busy, I would send him audio, or he'd hear an episode and he'd go, dude, this is so bad. You have like a train in the background. There's a police siren. When you have damaged audio, please send it to me. So I'd send him the damaged audio. It'd come back and I'd be like, wow, this is really nice. That sounds really good. And then, you know, I would be like, I'm really busy. Can I send you a couple more episodes? And he'd be like, yeah. So he edited my show for free for like a year. And then I upped my release schedule to 2 or 3 a week. And he's like, oh man, this is a lot of work. I was like, yeah, let me know if you want to get paid. And so then I started paying him. He actually didn't ask me for any money. Should have done that earlier, but whatever. We pay him generously now. And he basically made it so that it didn't make sense for me to edit my show anymore. And I strongly encourage people to edit their own show, especially in the beginning, for a minimum of 1 or 2 years, because you get rid of filler words. You find out all these weird verbal tics that you're doing. Uptalk, which is when you talk like this, and every sentence ends like this, and it gets really annoying, and then the listeners don't want to listen anymore. You know, you can get rid of those kind of habits. You can get rid of filler words where you say a lot of things that people don't really want to hear. You get rid of all that because you edit those out. And you're not going to never have any filler words or never do uptalk or never have a verbal tick again in your life, but you're going to realize that you are doing those and how often you are doing those, and then you can work on those little bits. So edit your own show for a couple of years. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Then what I did was when I started to get edits from Jason Sanderson, who's my producer, who, by the way, if you need one of the best audio engineers in the world, teams, I'm happy to refer you. Email me, jordan@jordanharbinger.com. He's got some people that work underneath him that are awesome. And he went to school with Mark Asquith, so you know his education is top notch.
We'll tell the story about how we found that out another time.
That's right. It involves urinals. And
It really does.
It really does. So what I do with my team, I mean, we're on Slack. Slack's like a miracle drug for startups. I don't think I have to really bump that service. Everybody uses it now, Slack or Teams. I upload the audio. There's an editing notes channel where I say like, okay, 20 minutes in with Mark Asquith, I dropped a can of Diet Coke on the floor, took a pause, you'll hear it. They're still talking, might want to mute my track. Or like 23 minutes in, they can't stop talking about their new rectal thermometer kit. So maybe edit that out. We don't really need that in the final version. You know, like whatever it is. And I'm putting these little notes in there, just typing them on Slack real quick, getting back to the interview. I'm pretty tight with the team when it comes to that sort of thing. And then I'll also sort of spot check their work, not to make sure they're doing a good job, but to make sure I'm doing a good job. I don't have to worry about Jason's work or Bob's work or anybody else on my team. I want to make sure that what I'm doing is good. So back when I used to go to the gym, back when there were gyms that were open in the United States, I would at least once a week, or I'd say once every other week, I would grab an episode that I thought was probably interesting or that I thought was probably a mess of editing. And I would just listen for me missing opportunities, listen for edits that I think maybe Jason could have thrown in there that I expected him to read my mind. And, you know, most of the time he gets those. I'm like, oh, he did remove that thing. I forgot to tell him. And I'll be like, good job removing that thing. And he's like, oh, I wondered if you wanted that in or out. Okay, good. Thanks for confirming. And then, you know, I listened for, I don't even know, like, oh, hey, there was some noise. Was this something you couldn't get out? No, I left it in on purpose. Or no, I can't get out sirens because they undulate or fluctuate, whatever it is. So you just learn a little bit about the process, because a lot of what a lot of podcasters do, they don't listen to the final product. So they're like, oh, I think I did an okay job, except for this, and this. But the editor will get that. And then if you listen to the final product, it's like, oh, why is that still in there? Well, I can't remove a lawnmower, or I can't remove a siren, or I can't remove this and that and the other thing. Or, oh, I don't have the tools for that. And the tool to get rid of it, Isotope RX7, is $1,200. Do you want to buy that? And you're like, yeah, I want to buy that. I don't want sirens. So like, you have to listen to the final product, just like you have to read your own show notes if you're not writing them yourself, because do you know what the show notes writer's throwing in there? Do you like the style? Do you like the voice? If you're not doing that, you're literally waiting. What you don't want to happen is for, and anybody who's manufactured a product knows this, what you don't want to happen is for you to find out from one of your users 16 months in that this thing is broken, or that thing's not sounding good, or that this thing isn't working right. And you're like, where else have we done that? Oh, on every episode for the last year and a half? Damn it. You know, like, I don't want that. I don't want this little thing that I think I'm getting away with to become a problem. I don't want certain things to be in the final product or not in the final product. So you have to spot check your own work. It's kind of like having a personal trainer for working out, only you're also checking your own form. Maybe it's like having someone videotape you, you know, and then you're watching your own game tape. Like, every athlete does this. No athlete goes, yeah, I don't know what went wrong in that game. Pff, whatever, let's go get some sushi. They're like, all right, sit down, watch every play of every game, pause. Coaches talk about everything that went right, talk about everything that went wrong. All good athletes do that. I don't know why podcasters and entrepreneurs don't do that. And I think it's just kind of like why we don't read the book. It's a lot of freaking work. People don't want to do it, you know, and I get it. Listening, watching your own stuff, like, who wants to do that? I got other things to do. I have new books to read. I have other people's stuff to consume. I just don't want to cringe at the way I look or sound. You know, that's a big thing for a lot of people. You have to get over that. And the way that you get over that is you plow through it. You won't get good at this if you're not watching or listening to your own game tape. You won't get good at this if you're not talking with your team. If you don't have a team, it doesn't even matter. It's all you. That's great. Makes things easier.
Yeah, it's definitely an ego thing as well. I think a lot of, certainly from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you're building a product, you know, if we built Captivate, in fact, we did the first wireframe that we did for Captivate. It got some of the bare bones in. I had to really objectively go through it and go, dude, what have you just built? It's ridiculous. And we could have shipped. You know, we could have skinned. We could have plumbed in the API in the back end, and we could have shipped, and it would have worked for a percentage of people. But the ego, once you take the ego out of it, you start to realize that, wait a second, come on, like, let's be really honest. We need to get to this next version of it. And that's what you then end up shipping. And it's definitely an ego and a humility thing. So, dude, I want to be respectful of your time. And we've got a few questions that I want to get to in a as well. But I want to ask you one kind of parting shot, and then we'll get to maybe a couple of user generated ones. 1.3 million podcasts, according to our friend in Slack, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis. There are so many starting interview shows now, especially in entrepreneurial niches, and they've seen what people like yourself and Rogan and Tim Ferriss have done in this space. If you were to go and start a new show today, you don't have the brand, you don't have the name, you don't have the audience, you don't have the list. What's the thing that you would do to stand out as an interview podcast? Just throwing you under the bus.
I would do the same things that I do now. I know that's a crap answer, but I'll qualify it. I think what a lot of people aren't doing is, like I said, the work of reading the book and going through and doing the prep. The way that I would stand out is simply doing better work than other people, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to do now. I just happen to also have a brand and a recognizable name and a team and a budget to advertise the show and all these other things that give me an advantage. But none of that would really make a big difference. Like, I know a lot of people that have budgets, teams, and their show stinks. They have to make up for their crappy content with their budget. They spend I know people that spend like $2,000 a day on digital ads, and they build this massive email list from their social, and they funnel everybody to the podcast, and then they're buying like fake reviews off of I don't know, Fiverr or wherever people, like LinkedIn, those messages that come in like, "Hi, I'm from Bangladesh and I will promote your show," organically, of course. They buy all that stuff. I look at those guys and I go, oh, the reason you do this is because you have, I guess you would call it like churn in the SaaS world. So it's when somebody finds your show and goes, oh, nah, I don't know. Nah, I'm good. I listened to 3 of these. This sucks. I'm out. You're going to have churn no matter what. I mean, even like the best NPR masterpieces, This American Life has churn where people are like, why do people like this? This guy's voice is annoying. Next, you have that. You have to minimize that churn, because otherwise you're spending $100,000 a year on getting people in, whatever that might be, work or cash or ads, whatever it is. And then you're losing 50,000 of those dollars or 80,000 of those dollars. Like, it's a waste. So what I'm trying to do is minimize churn. Do a really, 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 really good product. The best I can, the best my team can, put out as many as I can, or at that level, I should say, at that level of quality. And then entice the audience to share, build a really good tribe. I hate that word, but it's really good for this particular thing. Build a really good tribe, build a really good fan base. Then you can spend money on getting new people in. But there's so many people that go, oh, I can't do this because I don't really have a budget. I don't really have a way to get the word out. Dude, I didn't even look at my download numbers for like 7 years because there weren't good podcast metrics. The only company that even did podcast hosting that I'd even heard of at that point was Libsyn. They didn't have IAB certified downloads. They just had raw downloads. And they had some metric called partial downloads, which was like 80% of my downloads, which now we know are like mobile devices and streaming and, people downloading a bit now and a bit later and all this stuff. So they just showed you raw downloads. And it would be like up, down, up, down, up, down. And I checked like the monthly, I had like the cheapest Libsyn plan, which at the time only gave you like a weekly breakdown or a monthly breakdown. I mean, you didn't have like a daily graph, nothing. So I would look at these stats and go, I guess some people are still listening. 40,000 downloads last month. Oh, the month before that we had 70,000. Oh, and then the month after that we had 60. I don't know what's going on with these numbers. These are meaningless. I'm just going to keep doing the show. And then 6 months later, I'd log in and be like, oh, this is broken for 3 months. The stats are broken. Or like, this other thing doesn't work anymore. Or like, the downloads are up, I guess. But we didn't know how many people that was. We had no clue. And that was actually really good, because that meant that we couldn't focus on the metric of how many people were listening. All we could do was try to make a good show and be like, hey, if you're out there listening, which some of you apparently are, share it. And if you don't like it, tell us what you don't like. And we would get emails that were like, hey, can you record with the windows closed, you dummy? It sounds like garbage. Sounds like you're in a bathtub. And I'd be like, oh, weird. So I'd ask an audio guy, what's wrong with my audio? And they'd go, you're using a studio mic in a room with glass windows, a hardwood floor, and you leave the windows open. This is a terrible idea. So you have this learning curve where you're improving the product. That stuff is really important. Most of us, when we're starting a podcast now, we're looking at how do I get more people to listen? The answer is, of course, I get why, and I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that completely. That's my main concern a lot of the time as well, one of my main concerns. but really it shouldn't be. It's cool vanity though, but it shouldn't be. What you should be thinking of is, how do I get the 100 people that listen now to be like, this is the best podcast. This is the best one. Because if you have 10,000 people that hear you tomorrow and your podcast is meh and it's commoditized and it's just like a bunch of other people's podcasts, what incentive do they have to share? Zero. What incentive do they have to stick around? Zero. What incentive do they have to even listen anymore? Pretty much zero. If you have a really good show and then you get 10 more people to listen and 8 of them stick around because they're like, how did I not find this before? Then you can throw gasoline on the fire. But what we find is people trying to figure out how to get more gasoline when there's no frickin' fire. And, you know, they just end up smothering whatever they have or just wasting their time, money, and resources. That's why I don't screw around with like TikTok, Instagram. I have Instagram. I don't have TikTok. I have Twitter for people to write to me. I don't like come up with little pithy comments. I don't make media for those channels because everybody I know who's writing about how those are great to grow podcasts, I've yet to be convinced, man. I've yet to see like significant crossover or people going, oh, I saw this on Instagram. Like I never get letters that say I saw this on Instagram, so I decided to listen to your show. Oh, I saw this on TikTok. I decided to listen to this show. Never, which means that it's happening probably very, very rarely. What I find is people hearing about it on other shows, people Googling something. I just focus on that. And so I think that you really have to be careful because if you don't focus on the product, it really doesn't matter how much marketing you do. I mean, we've all seen things. Look, Firefest was marketed really well, right? If you guys, did you hear about Firefest over there in the UK?
Yeah. We watched the documentary, bro. Don't you worry. We watched the documentary.
Nobody's like recommending you go to Firefest next year. 0 people, right?
And also to kind of extrapolate that a bit, like no one's recommending that you work with the guys who created Firefest or did. So it becomes a holistic, and this kind of takes it right back to what we talked about with Chris at the beginning of the event, which was, you know, everything that you do, Jordan, it comes with wrapped in Jordan. You know, I saw the background that you've got now. I was like, is that the same background as the cover? And everything is branded, and it's the reputation that goes with it. So if you produce one bad episode, no one believes that the next one isn't very, very much better. They don't trust that you have got better. They don't appreciate that maybe you're having a bad day. That is their version of Jordan. So you have to be continually at that level. And it's the same with the SaaS. I mean, you work with Squadcast, you work with us at Captivate. You have to be at that level. And all you're trying to do is protect your worst case, which is we will never be worse than we are today. And I am happy to continually push forward. And I think that what amazes me with this is that like podcasters generally don't think like that though. They think because it's a creative medium and you're doing it into a microphone, they don't think about it how we think of product. And they think about it just as like they might think of doing a little doodle on a piece of paper because it's creation, but it doesn't kind of matter. It doesn't matter how good it is. Is that something that you know, because I would assume, and I am totally assuming here, that other people say to you, how do I make my show as good as yours? When they realize everything that you've said today needs to happen, do you find that they're just like, nah, mate, nah, it's a podcast. Why would I? You know,
yeah, there's some of that, and there's some of what I was talking about before, which is like when I was talking about like, sorry, I lost my train of thought. When I was talking about reading the books, right? When I first knew that I needed to do that, or when I first got the inkling that I needed to do that, my first instinct was, okay, how can I convince myself that I really don't need to do that? How can I negotiate my way around really doing that? You know, and so I have to always ask myself, even now, like when I don't mess with TikTok and I say, oh, it's a waste of time, am I telling myself that because I really think and have calculated that it's a waste of time? Or am I telling myself that because I really don't want to have to do content like that and hire someone to deal with that and then manage that? And I've come to the conclusion, and I ask myself this question over and over on a regular basis. I have come to the conclusion that it's a time suck for creators and a waste of time. And I look at things like Instagram the same way. And I realize like, okay, but that doesn't mean that there's no value to it, and I should keep an open mind to other channels, because it's really easy to then say, Yeah, but then you went to Instagram later, and I'm like, well, yeah, but what am I doing that for? Oh, okay, because my friends are there, so I use it to keep in touch with friends. Do I use it for business? Yes, fans write me there, but I don't post like, check out the latest episode. I don't really mess with that stuff. So I'm very, very careful about what I'm rationalizing, what's a bunch of BS, and what is actually something that's useful. And so I have to, when I tell people what I'm doing, I encourage them to then think, are you resistant to the idea because it sounds like too much work? Or are you resistant to the idea because you think I'm actually wrong about why the show is good? If you think I'm actually wrong and you don't need to read the book and you don't need to have professional editing or edit the show yourself and you're just going to, like, there's some people that just put the show out as is, right? They're like, no, it's raw, bro, it's awesome. Do you believe that? Does your audience like the fact that it's totally unedited and they can hear you sneeze and like take a 5-minute break to go to the bathroom? I don't really think so. I think they would be a little happier with the final product if you polished it a little. So are you lying to yourself or because you don't want to do the work? If so, cool, fine, not my problem. But that will limit you just like it limited me. Like I think all the time, like, wow, I would have gotten so much better, so much quicker if years ago I'd started reading the books. It's not like it didn't occur to me to do enough prep for my interviews. I just thought, I don't need to, I'm getting away with it. Ho, 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 I'm so smart. And that just wasn't the case. The case was that anything you do based off your natural talent is probably going to be better if you are also putting in the work. Like, I don't think anybody's a naturally fast runner and then is like, I'm never going to work out. I'm just naturally fast, right? Like no athlete goes, I'm never hitting the gym. I'm just naturally athletic. Those people, I'm sure there are athletes like that. They don't do anything professionally. They work at Target, because they don't make it in the professional leagues because they don't train. And you can't do anything super well if you don't put in the work. Surprise, surprise, big revelation there, right? But like when people are resistant to new ideas and when I'm resistant to new ideas, I'm like, what's the reason? Do I have a good, well thought, rational reason to not do this? Or is it because the amount of work just seems like a lot and I don't want to deal with it? That's not a good reason to not do something. Most of the time.
That's a huge point, man. I think that's a huge, I genuinely do. And I think as a creator, you get into creating because you want to create and everything else is the thing that you rationalize away as well. Yeah. That's not for me. I don't want to have to learn about SEO and Google, just even enough just that I can commission someone to do it for me. I don't even want to do that stuff because I'm a podcaster and I don't want to do it. So I think you made some great points. Now, we'll stick a pin in it, dude, because I do want to be respectful of your time and I could talk to you all day, but this has been honestly always wildly fascinating. I'm going to stick your, the old website up there. So please go and check Jordan out. I'm sure many of you already know Jordan and what he does, but if you are new to what Jordan does, please go and check it out, jordanharbinger.com. And dude, thank you so much for this. I really, really appreciate it and all you do for us.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. My pleasure. I hope this goes well. There's a lot of questions in the sidebar. I wonder if there's a way to if you save those, maybe we can do something. I don't know, whatever you want, but you could save those and we could do a follow-up thing or whatever. I don't know. Cause there was a lot in there and we didn't really pay any attention to those people, and I feel kind of bad.
No, there was a ton of them, and you're right. So we've got them all in a Google Doc. I'm going to down here, so we'll collect them all up. And you and me will chat in Slack actually about the best way to do that. Then we'll do something for that. It's very generous. Thanks, man.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for having me on.
Much love. Thanks, mate. See you soon.